Lisa Levinson organizes vegan spirituality groups, retreats, and online gatherings across the country as part of In Defense of Animals' Sustainable Activism campaign, which offers emotional and spiritual resources for animal activists. Take a listen.
This is a Religica production. Religica.
Maybe you could say a little bit about how you came upon the idea of your organization, and you're vegan. Mm-hmm. How long have you been doing that? And then a little bit about how this came to be, and then we can talk about what it's doing.
Okay, sure. My name's Lisa Levinson, and my story, we call that your vegan story.
Yeah.
So my vegan story is really, there's the long version and the short version, so I'll tell you the short one.
Yeah,
I've been vegan for about 25 years.
Oh.
And I went vegetarian first. I did work on an educational farm that was a working farm and got to know some of the animals there, and then they were actually taken off to slaughter, which was really upsetting to me. And so I developed that desire to learn more about our connection to animals and also to the food that we eat. And I decided I didn't want to eat the animals because they were my friends. And then...
What year would that have been and where?
That was probably in 1992, and I was at a place called Hidden Villa Ranch, which is a educational farm that's just south of the San Francisco Bay Area. It was run by the Duveneck family, and they used to bring children from the inner city to the farm, and we would do really environmental education. Yeah. So from there, I don't even remember hearing the word vegan. I was totally unaware of that until I moved to the East Coast and met up with some macrobiotic people. And at that time, if you were macrobiotic and you were vegetarian, you were pretty much vegan. So, but it wasn't really called vegan yet, although that's what we were doing in terms of our diet, which was no animal products. So no eggs or dairy, also no honey as well. So anything that really comes from an animal. So the idea of being vegan is really to live your life without any animal products, because normally when animals become part of that system, let's call it part of the economy, then there's this tendency for their well-being to be sacrificed in order to make the product better, faster, more convenient. Mm-hmm. And so even though in a product such as wool, if you're shearing the sheep, it technically may not need to hurt the sheep. Generally, when those things are done for the economic efficiency, then they are done quickly, they're done inefficiently, and they're often done where the animals can suffer, where they're hurt, actually. They get injuries, and so there's a lot to it. There's a lot to being vegan, and that's all of it comes together in a spiritual practice as well, because when we're vegan for spiritual reasons, we're doing that to practice the concept of ahimsa, which can be translated as a dynamic harmlessness, or to do the least amount of harm that we can do. So we're not perfect. Many times animals are inadvertently hurt, but our goal and our intention, and that's the real key here, is our intention is to be as conscious as we can and to do no harm as much as we can.
You have a personal spiritual practice that is identifiable, or that you could...
Well, my background is Jewish, and during my own journey, I did seek and explored other sorts of practices, such as even pagan practices, just to learn more about religions. I've always been very interested in them, and even exploring Eastern religions as well. And so for me personally, I think of, I guess you could call me maybe a multi-faith type of person, although I identify culturally and probably in my heart and soul as a Jewish person. But my most core value is veganism.
Okay.
And because to me, all of the religions in the world, one of the things that really brings us together, that unifies us, is this idea of compassion. And our goal as part of the Interfaith Vegan Coalition is to encourage other people of faith to widen their circle of compassion, to include non-human animals. I firmly believe that's the intention of every religious leader and a prophet was to include all living beings in their circle of compassion. So what we're doing is we're trying to remind people of faith of that principle and how key it is to their highest values in their own tradition.
So in terms of the transition to the organization, how'd that come about and when?
Sure. Well, actually, our Interfaith Vegan Coalition is relatively new. We've been around for a couple of years, and we started because we wanted to engage faith leaders in this discussion and dialogue about encouraging their communities to adopt vegan values. Part of it is that we are at the intersection of an important road in our lives as human beings and all beings around the planet, which is we're facing some serious extinction due to global warming, and it's really important that all religious leaders look at that aspect. And that is also a moral imperative. It's something that relates to our spiritual beliefs. We care for our planet, and so we want to encourage veganism to reduce the detriment of agriculture, animal agriculture in specific, to our planet. So our organization also started because there are many, many faith-based vegan advocacy groups, and we wanted to have one united voice. There have been for many years Christian groups, and there's Jewish Veg and many Jewish groups, and even there are synagogues that are vegan. And we're learning more and more. There's something called the Muslim Vegan Initiative. And so we wanted to become a united voice so that we can have projects, events, and also to be able to comment on events that happen in the world as a united vegan voice. So that was an inspiration for us to join together. And I also started many years ago an organization called Vegan Spirituality. And that effort was really to explore veganism as a spiritual practice. And when we did that, we invited people of all faiths to join us, and those who also felt that veganism was their faith. So people who really felt connected to their community, whether it was Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, they also felt as though they needed a voice where they could be themselves, their full self, and include their vegan self. So we were able to create our own rituals that relate to being vegan in this modern day world in an interfaith type of community.
Now we're talking about climate change. I mean, they're linked. Could you describe a little bit about what you see as a link and some numbers attached and
Sure.
why this matters?
So I will first mention that Climate Healers is one of our members, and they focus on bringing veganism to the world as a way to heal the climate issue that we have right now. And so they have lots of numbers and data. One of their main goals, projects right now is something called Vegan 2026. And the idea is in order to prevent year zero, which relates to the number of species that we have that are in decline right now, that if we don't do anything about this, by the year 2026, we may not have any types of vertebrates, I think. So their platform is really to encourage people to go vegan for the planet and for all the animals. So in terms of our group, embrace that fully and support this idea of being vegan as an important part of environmental preservation. And then thinking in terms of lots of numbers, I'm not great with
simple
that.
ones.
Simple ones. Right. So, you can look at this from the large perspective, which is to feed the world's hungry, because when we feed so many of our farmed products the agriculture is grown to feed the livestock and animals that are farmed animals, we call them. And we can certainly derive way more nutrients and benefits if we eat the plants directly than if they have to go literally through the bodies of the animals. Yeah. And all of the suffering that's involved in that, but also extreme waste of resources such as plants, and literally waste itself, because there's large cesspools of feces that are derived from raising the animals, and that type of effluent is actually sprayed on other products. The agribusiness is really looking for what to do with all of these leftover products. And we had a serious issue with one of our hurricanes, Hurricane Florence, in North Carolina area. These pools of waste actually began to overflow into the water system, and that's very serious because people won't be able to drink their water. So we have some huge environmental issues that come from producing animals for food, and it also doesn't help us to feed the world's hungry. There's some wonderful organizations that are vegan organizations and that are seeking to feed the world's population through veganism itself. So the earliest one is Food Not Bombs, and then a newer one is A Well-Fed World, and their focus is actually feeding the world's hungry by feeding vegan food. And if we all did that, we wouldn't have the destruction of the rainforest, it's really shocking when you see diagrams or footage of how devastating that is, because a lot of the plants that create the oxygen that we need to survive are actually coming from these areas that local people, in order to make money quickly, will chop down all of the forest, the jungle itself, and it's barren, and that damages the animals and us in so many ways, because that's our warehouse of oxygen. But it also leaves animals such as monkeys without trees to actually climb on and to swing from branch to branch. They don't have, their habitat is gone, and then they'll go extinct as well because of it. So it's a very, very serious, so many animals depend on that type of foliage. And on the other spectrum, we have animals such as, they're very teeny tiny organisms in the ocean that other animals depend on, and they actually bring the oxygen into the ocean. And when we have raised the temperature of the ocean due to all of this pollution that we're creating, those animals will die off, and in turn the food chain in the ocean will suffer.
So it looks like you're to some degree working with umbrella groups of other traditions. I mean, these are groups, the Christian, vegan, vegetarian, whatever that is, association in America. What's the reception you get about this idea of them kind of collaborating?
Oh, yes. I mean, because all of our members are faith-based vegan advocacy groups, so they're all connected by that desire to encourage people to go vegan within their faith. And so our group is very harmonious.
Yeah.
And what we do is try to provide support for these individual groups as they go out into their communities to advocate for veganism. We also provide support for individuals. So we have a whole project we put together of these vegan advocacy kits, and they're actually designed for individuals who are part of the community, and they've perhaps experienced frustration because their community won't adopt any vegan values, they won't change some of their practices or rituals. And we just spoke with a person from the Sikh community this morning, and she's the one person who's vegan in her area, and expressed her frustration and was so excited to find out that we had a Sikh vegan advocacy kit that was designed by a vegan Sikh to help those who are also vegan in their community to go to the leaders of that community and say, oh, here's a ritual that we can do that incorporates vegan values. Here's a song or a prayer that relates to animals in the way that I relate to animals. Here's a recipe that we can make dal without using any animal products. So we try to provide as many resources as we could for these folks so they can go back to their spiritual leaders and have some activities, some information to share with them.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the interesting things, isn't it? There's a lot of things that people make that there's sort of a momentum about incorporating animal products, or people have created certain kinds of things based on animal products because they were there or something, or maybe because the royalty had them and now it's percolated down, but there's absolutely no objective reason why it has to be that way. And just sort of relearning is interesting. I actually I do Buddhist stuff. I know you about Buddha.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was at a retreat center just a couple of weeks ago, and it struck me that a few years ago, this is a place called Cloud Mountain in Washington State. A few years ago, if you were vegan there, they'd have a separate, but it's kind of like you were in the bowl of just quinoa gulag while everybody else was eating the groovy stuff. But now they've morphed into, they're making amazing stuff, and it's vegan. And they just don't make a big, or once in a while have some cheese on the one side and not cheese on the other side. But basically, everything's vegan, and they've just dropped putting eggs and milk and things because you don't have to.
Yes,
You
that
just absolutely don't have to. And once they learn how to not have to, and everybody else has no idea they're eating vegan, but
yeah,
it's fine.
exactly. And in fact, that's a really exciting. We have one of our members of our coalition is Dharma Voices for Animals, which was co-founded by Bob Isaacson, and he basically goes into different Buddhist communities and he recruits Buddhist leaders who are vegan to talk about it within their communities, and also goes back to the places of worship and provides them with a questionnaire where they're able to answer questions like, what types of cleaning products do you use? Would you be willing to purchase an alternative that's cruelty-free? And we will even pay the difference if there is one financially. So they really go in with intention to these different communities and encourage them to take a step, maybe to do meals that are vegan friendly or even all vegan. So I think these are all wonderful ways to encourage our faith leaders and also places of worship to make these really small changes in some ways that can have a huge impact on animals. And that group, Dharma Voices for Animals, has a wonderful model that is faith specific. And we decided to, we work closely with them to create similar types of resources for all faiths.
Well, this is wonderful and very inspiring.
Oh my goodness! Well,
so I'm glad we ran into each other, and
yeah, well, it's such a treat and such an honor to be part of the Parliament, and also to be able to share our story with you and to be included. And that's why we came, because we saw the theme of this Parliament was inclusion, and we strongly believe that animals need to be included in our spiritual future of our planet.
You've been listening to Religica. Visit us at www.religica.org.